we've got a terrific session today with Inara de Leon, who will introduce Arnon Mishkin to everybody. He's the election analyst, and we're delighted that both of them are back with us today. This has been quite a year, and we all hope to get through the next few weeks. So we thank Arnon and Inara for being here with us. So Inara, I turn it over to you. And again, we look forward to comments, questions. Just write to me, please, in chat if you have some. All yours, Inara.
Thank you so much, Judy. And again, it's if you have questions, it's Judy Langer who will be fielding them and sprinkling them in throughout the session. So feel free to ask questions at any point. I'm so happy to have Arnon back. Some of you may remember Arnon Mishkin from his appearance here in 2022, when he so ably walked us through the somewhat surprising off-year election results that vaunted red wave that polls had predicted didn't exactly happen, which has led to a lot of head scratching and also to some degree dysfunction in Congress because the congressional majority was so slim for the Republicans. But for those of you who were not here, Arnon has led the Fox News decision desk on election night since 2008. Wow. 16 years, a lot of presidential water under the bridge. He famously called Arizona early and accurately for Biden in 2020, infuriating the Trump camp and also his Fox executives.
I wouldn't say that, but go on.
You wouldn't? Okay. Well, we interpreted it differently. There were many GOP challenges to the vote in that state that year. And I think, Arnon, you're going to tell us this year may get even stickier after Election Day. But first, let's talk about the state of the race. Nearly all high-quality polling is telling us the presidential race could not be tighter. Most analysts say there's never been one as close as this one in modern history. Although, Arnon, you contend that the last several presidential elections have been nail-biters, and I think you're right about that. So, Arnon, what are your thoughts? Do you think the polls accurately reflect, what we might, expect to see happen in 12 days from now? I think you have some recent historical perspective that you'd like to share with us, on the Electoral College.
Yeah.
I invite you to tell us what you've got.
Okay. Why don't I walk through a couple of slides, Inara, and then
okay.
I'll probably I've shown you the slides. I'll probably interrupt in the middle of it to get to some of the questions.
Okay.
And particularly the questions on, are the polls accurate?
Okay.
And so stay tuned for that. But just a few. Okay, so basically, I call this campaign "Return to Greatness" or "Turn the Page." It is the first time since the 19th century when a former president who lost his bid for re-election came back 4 years later to regain the nomination and run again. And he is running against the first woman who has served as vice president, and for the second time, a woman is running for president. And in this case, it is the first woman of African American as well as Indian extraction who is running for president. But if you think about, you talked about how I've been at Fox working on election nights since 1998. So, and for the entirety of this history of this century, if you will, two things have been true. The first is that they're really close elections. The one exception of a close in that was 2008, when basically Barack Obama was running. Everyone had fallen, including those who were voting for John McCain. I know because I worked with many of them, kind of fell in love with the guy. And it's the midst of a massive recession, the beginnings of the massive recession called, I guess, the Great Recession of 2008. and at the end of the Bush administration. So that was a fairly easy night for us. But every other night or week has been fairly challenging, starting in the 2000 election. And yes, Inara is absolutely right. The polls show a very close race. No matter how you cut the numbers in the polls, it looks like it's a very close race. I still doubt if the race is going to be decided by 537 votes in one state, the way it was decided in 2000 between Bush and Gore. But who knows? Maybe it'll be as close or closer than that one. But the other thing that's been true this century is that the GOP has had a clear Electoral College advantage. And as all of you know, we don't have a presidential election. We actually have 51, depending on how you count, maybe 57 different presidential elections. And many of them, by the way, aren't that close. But the reason we have all these elections is because each state votes and allocates their electoral college based on the vote. In most states, it is the allocation is winner take all for that state. In 2 states, Maine and Nebraska, the state allocates their electoral college votes by congressional district. So the winner of the state gets 2 electoral college votes, and the winner of each congressional district gets 1. The first time we saw that happen was in 2008 when Barack Obama won the Omaha congressional district in Nebraska and wound up getting a single electoral college vote from Nebraska. The second time that happened was in 2016 when Trump won the 2nd district in Maine, and that was the first time Maine split their electoral college votes. And the next time it happened was in 2020 when Biden won the Omaha district in Nebraska and Trump won the northern rural district in Maine. But overall, the GOP has had a clear electoral college advantage this century. So in 2000, Bush lost the popular vote by 0.5 percentage point, but he won the electoral college because he won Florida by 537 votes, and he wound up with 271 out of the majority of electoral college votes. In 2016, Trump lost the popular vote by 2%, but he won 305 electoral college votes because he managed to sweep the Midwestern Rust Belt, or however you want to call it, states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And in 2020, Trump lost the popular vote by almost 5%, 7 million votes, but he almost won the Electoral College. He came really close. I think 30,000 votes separated him losing the Electoral College to him winning the Electoral College. The reason for the GOP advantage, we believe, or historically has been, as I said, in most states, with those 2 small state exceptions, most states are winner take all. It doesn't matter if you win that state by 1 vote or if you win that state by 7 million votes. And you'd rather win that state by 1 vote, because if you were a true magician, you realized you won that state by 1 vote. So let me move all those other people to another state where they can vote for my candidate and win the Electoral College votes in that case. And historically, the Republicans have been very efficient in how they've gotten their vote. And the Democrats have been incredibly inefficient. So the Democrats win and will win California probably by 7 million votes. They'll win New York by 4 million votes. Trump is expected to win Florida and Texas. I would not be surprised. The expectation is, as before, he may win them by 500,000 votes. He's not going to win them by millions of votes. That's the way you want to run a presidential campaign, because you don't want to waste votes in states where you don't need them. And thus far this century, the Republicans have been very, very effective in that way. It's not, and by the way, it is not deliberate. It is the way our America lives. Democrats tend to live in large urban areas, and the suburbs. Large urban areas tend to be in very large states, and Republicans are much more prevalent in rural areas. The rural areas are the smaller states, and they've had an advantage as a result. And the expectation is that that's what's going to happen this year. But stay tuned. So now let's talk about the race and the polling. One of the things that we've known is that despite all the headlines you've seen, despite all the name calling we've been through, despite the fact that the Democrats at one point decided that they needed a designated hitter because their candidate, for whatever reason, decided to drop out. And I don't want to get into the reasons he dropped out, but I mean, I think we all lived through it. Despite the fact that one candidate has been indicted several times, as he puts it, he's been indicted more than Alphonse Capone. One of the things we've seen is for the past year, from September 23 to September 24, Donald Trump has basically been within 48, but in the Fox News poll has been between 48 and gotten between 48 and 50% of the vote. And nothing seems to matter. Seems to have had a rock solid somewhere between 48 and 50 in our poll. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I jump in real fast with a question?
Absolutely.
I think people hear Fox poll and they wonder, is it slanted in Fox's direction? Could you address that?
Sure. I mean, I think that the general belief is that Fox tends to be what we like to think of as a center-right news organization, and that as opposed to the other news organizations, which many would refer to as center-left. I think that one of the realities of American politics is that all our media companies have sort of gone to serve the audience that they get, and they tend to have sort of moved either left or right. Since I'm tangentially involved in the Fox News poll, it's partly, you can believe me or not, but I think in general, most people who cover polling would say that the Fox News poll is one of the best polls out there. I think the poll, there are these rating agencies for polling, I think 538.com, and for the past few cycles, Fox has always gotten an A rating. An A rating is based on A, how accurate they were in terms of estimating the final vote, and B, how open are they about their methodology, and to what extent do they use what are considered the best components of polling methodology. But I think most people would say you should not dismiss the Fox News numbers in their polling, nor the Fox News calls, based on what you think of of Sean Hannity.
I think that also that your polls are generally not in sync, but not wildly divergent from other polls
Exactly.
that one might interpret as more liberal leaning.
And in fact, I saw a study of 2022 polling, and it ironically enough, I think that the poll that the New York Times does was considered one that sort of tended to overestimate Republicans, and the poll that we do tends to overestimate Democrats. And both polls got A ratings from these agencies, but sort of ironic that so it's about a 0.1% skew, if you will, if there's a skew. Which is basically a function of there is noise in every poll. And ironically enough, the noise in our poll may be too Democratic and the noise in their poll may be too Republican. But the point of this thing is that no matter what's happened, whoever the Democratic candidate is, Trump's been getting in our poll between 48 and 50%, which, by the way, is more than he got 4 years ago and more than he got 8 years ago. 8 years ago, he got 46.1% of the vote. He won the Electoral College. Last time around, he got almost 47% of the vote. He almost won the Electoral College. So my mantra all year has been, just look at Trump's number. Don't look at the difference. Just look at his number. If his number really is 48, I would much prefer to be Donald Trump than Kamala Harris. If his number goes down below that, if his number is 46, I'd rather be Kamala Harris than Donald Trump. And if his number is 47, my joke is I don't want to be me because we're in for a long count. So I don't get a lot of sleep. So now let's look at what has shifted, if anything has shifted. And there are a couple of shifts in the numbers. And And if I hope none of you get bothered. I mean, everyone always gets bothered by numbers, but beneath all these numbers are stories. So there are four numbers that I look at in addition to the Trump number, which I talk about. And that is the number amongst minority groups, particularly African Americans and Hispanics, and especially male African Americans and male Hispanics, and non-college educated African Americans and Hispanics. And that number shows signs of Trump growth. So in the 2020 Fox News voter analysis, which is our election day poll, Trump was getting less than 10% of African Americans. In some polls, we're seeing him getting almost 30%, which would be astonishing. I don't think he's going to get 30%, but he is clearly making some inroads. And there's a debate amongst people of whether or not the inroads are going to be, how significant they're going to be. My sense is it ain't going to be 30%, but that's a problem for the Democrats to lose what is one of their, not to lose, but to get weaker in one of their core constituencies. And similarly amongst Hispanic voters, this is, Donald Trump has actually done better amongst Hispanics than anyone anticipated he would do from 2016 onward. But so the other number to look at is what is Trump's strength amongst Hispanic voters? And yes, it's gone up a bit from 2020 to 2024. Now, Trump taketh, but also Trump giveth away. There's also a thing to look at in terms of what Harris and Walz have been getting. And there are two numbers there that I've been looking at that I think are important. The first is the rural vote for Harris or Walz. And by rural, I mean especially rural whites. One of the reasons that Tim Walz was picked by Kamala Harris to be her running mate is because there was a belief that he could have a significant impact on the rural vote. And again, the strategy on the Harris part was not to win the rural vote. The strategy was to cut into the rural vote, to just lose it by less. And there's some evidence that he's actually been able to achieve that. I've always said that, Walz has two states on his to-do list, Wisconsin, and I think there's some evidence he's having some impact there, and Omaha. And because he's from Nebraska, and I actually think he's going to do that. They are going to win there. And then there's the last number I've been looking at, which I think is really important, which is what I call the non-MAGA GOP vote. MAGA stands for Make America Great Again. It is the movement that Trump says he leads. It is the movement that wears those red hats, Make America Great Again. And it represents a large chunk of the Republican Party, about 75%, sometimes as low as 66%, somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of the Republicans say, I am part of the MAGA movement. The 25%, though, say they're not. And those are the people who, for whatever reason, aren't totally comfortable with Donald Trump as president. These are the people who wanted either Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley or anyone else who was running to be the nominee of the Republican Party. And they are still there. And that's why even after Nikki Haley dropped out, she was still getting a good chunk of votes in the Republican primaries. So to me, that's the weak spot for Trump, but it's also the target spot for Kamala Harris. There's a reason why she went on Fox News to talk to Bret Baier. Actually, and I think there's a reason she got 7.1 million viewers in her interview with Bret Baier. Yeah. And the reason in my book is because that's the place where she can meet with non-MAGA Republicans, that show. And in this case, there are signs that Harris has made inroads there. I don't know if she's going to make enough. I've seen in 2020, Joe Biden got about 25% of that group. A quarter of that group decided, I cannot stomach Donald Trump. I'm voting for Joe Biden. There's some polls I've seen that have Harris getting upwards of 35% of that group. If she really does that, she wins. The latest Fox News poll had her getting about 20%. So not quite doing what Biden was able to do, but we'll see. So a couple more things in terms of where the race stands. Right now, this is the New York Times averages, which I think the New York Times and 538, I think, have the best averages of polling. Some of the other polling averages you may see tend to have a bunch of polls that are really, you're recording this, so I shouldn't say it, but I'll say it anyway, junk polls that just confuse us. And that's certainly what happened in 2022. But in the latest average, there is a slight Harris lead in the Electoral College. Excuse me, a slight Harris lead in the national popular vote, 49% to 48%. If this is what it is heading on election night, or the night before the election, I certainly would rather be Donald Trump. And that's but then comes the Electoral College. And I think you've all seen this map. Those of you, if you're on this Zoom, you're following this race. As we said, for those, I teach a class at Northeastern, and I said to them that you guys live in Massachusetts, and your vote today is as impactful as the vote you took in elementary school, because they were all in first grade when Obama first ran, and it's as the vote you took in elementary school for whether you were voting for Obama or McCain. And that's certainly true of my vote. Although in my case, the elementary school vote the choice was between Lyndon Johnson and Barry Goldwater.
I wonder if we can go to the Pennsylvania piece, because I think, a lot of us are really curious about the swing state.
Yes. So that's what I was going to say. So let's the states are. So these are the polls from the current swing states. Here's in Wisconsin, there seems to be a slight lead for Kamala Harris, 49 to 48%. In Michigan, she has a slight lead, 49 to 48%. In Pennsylvania, where you want to go, she has a lead of 49 to 48%. Nevada, the same thing, or it's almost tied, 48 to 48. In Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina, Trump has a lead of 49 to 48%. I'd like to point out one strange thing in all these polls, which is Trump is in these battleground states is basically getting what he's getting nationally. And this to me has been surprising for the past month and a half, because you would expect Donald Trump ought to be doing better in Pennsylvania than he's doing nationally. Pennsylvania has a larger population, a rural population. It has a smaller urban population. It should be, these states should, the reason they're battlegrounds is they skew better for the Republicans than the popular vote. The most interesting thing is they're not. And so maybe his advantage isn't what it was 4 years ago. And I think that's an important thing. The other thing to know is that in all these states are seeing a race different from the one you're seeing. I was chatting with some of you before the session, and you talked about how your friends in Pennsylvania have turned their TV off because all they see are TV ads for the two candidates. And for whatever reason, these people are thinking a little differently than they were thinking before, but their number seems to be settled where it is nationally. I can tell you that who wins the Electoral College is going to be determined in these 7 states, and it's all of them are too close to call. If I am Donald Trump, the thing I'm feeling great about is I'm getting numbers far higher than what I was getting 4 years ago. And if I'm Kamala Harris, the thing I'm feeling great about is I haven't spent all my $1 billion on TV advertising. I've spent a lot of it on what is called in the political game, the ground game, which is identifying people, micro-targeting them, and knowing who to call and make sure they have voted. And they haven't been doing this since July, because basically The incumbent president, who was intending to run for re-election, has been building his operation for roughly 4 years in these states. And the fact that, and all he did was hand the whole system off to Harris. And so to a certain extent, that's good news. That may be good news for Harris. So on that note,
I just want to tell people I've gotten a couple of questions in group chat that I think we're going to save for later. Definitely
why don't
have
we
an opportunity.
turn it over? Why don't I stop sharing? When we get to the Senate, I'll share one more slide, but may not need to.
Okay.
Okay. So you actually you didn't get to this piece of it. You say that Pennsylvania is really critical, Arnon, in the Electoral College. You want to go back to that
Yeah,
slide?
let me just show that
Yeah.
that one slide. These are various scenarios. If Harris wins Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Nebraska too, she gets 270 Electoral College votes. That was the main route for Joe Biden to win re-election, and that's where he thought he had the best chance. On the other hand, if she wins Michigan, Wisconsin, Nebraska too, and North Carolina, but loses Pennsylvania, Trump gets 272. If she wins Michigan, Wisconsin, Nebraska, in order to win without Pennsylvania, she needs to get Michigan, Wisconsin, Nebraska too, North Carolina, and Nevada. And then she'd have 273. But if she loses either Michigan or Wisconsin and just wins Michigan, Wisconsin, Nebraska too, North Carolina, and Nevada, Trump wins. So basically, when you look at that, you realize Pennsylvania is the keystone. And if whoever wins there will likely move into the White House in January.
So Julia, could you pull up the Pennsylvania Bob Casey, David McCormick? So what? Yeah, let's do a deeper dive on Pennsylvania. There's a pretty hot Senate race going on there. Bob Casey is the incumbent, a couple of terms at least. David McCormick ran unsuccessfully the last time against in the primary against Dr. Oz, and Dr. Oz lost to John Fetterman. But now David McCormick is running again and running very strongly against Bob Casey. I think the polling is showing him neck and neck, and the Cook report has put this Senate race into the toss-up category. Does that have an effect on, do people, either Democrats get disillusioned or, or does it motivate them to turn out at the polls, vote for Bob Casey and also vote for Kamala Harris?
So the good news for Trump is that McCormick seems to be running a better race than he was running a few weeks ago. And the reason why that's good is that Trump does not have enough money, has not been investing in a ground game. McCormick supposedly has. And McCormick is spending a lot of money. And so McCormick's efforts will likely not just help McCormick, but help Trump. Because presumably, if you go to the polls to vote for McCormick, you're also going to vote for the Republican at the top of the ticket, who's Trump. And so that's very helpful, I think, for Trump. And at the same time, it is the other thing about that state that I would say the best news I've heard for Kamala Harris is the polls in 2022 very much underestimated the strength of the Democrat, Fetterman, who was running against Dr. Oz. They thought most polls said it was going to be a close race. It was not a close race. And so that's the silver lining, if you will, for Kamala Harris. But yeah, Pennsylvania is a tough nut for either one of them. It is a very, very tight race from every polling we've seen, both on the Senate side and the presidential side. And there's a chance that the Republicans sweep both seats.
Do you have a sense of what the issues are that are driving people, to one or the other candidate in Pennsylvania? I assume the economy is important, but what about abortion? What about from your research?
No one has figured out the right way to test abortion. Abortion is the third most important issue to Americans, according to most polls. When you ask people what's the most important issue the country's facing or that your vote, and it's abortion. And the reason why that's may not be right is because abortion is one of those issues that, yeah, many people have a view of what they think the right approach, government approach to abortion should be. But the bigger question is, for how many people is this issue number 1, 2, 3, and 4? And this is the issue that really pushes them to go out to the polls to vote. And then secondly, vote for the candidate who's supportive of their position. And, abortion is one of those sort of cutting wedge issues that for 50 years, most voters, a minority of voters, took the side that they wanted to overturn Roe versus Wade. But for that minority of voters, that was the thing that got them to the polls. And it was a massively important issue for them. And that is one of the reasons that drove a lot of the sort of Republican strength, basically since the time of since the 80s. And what we saw in 22 is what drove a lot of Democrats to the polls who we didn't realize were going to be voting. And that was why a lot of people were surprised by how close the 2022 election was and how not close it was in Pennsylvania. And I think one of the big questions pollsters argue with themselves about now is, what are we going to see in 2 weeks? Are we going to see that abortion had the kind of strength it had in 2022, or are we going to see that is faded as an issue? I believe we're going to see it's a very, very important issue, but I don't know if it's going to be enough to push Kamala over the top.
So I think Harris has been spending more money in Pennsylvania than anywhere else. And, the airwaves are inundated. People's mailboxes are stuffed. Are people just getting sick of this? And are they going to turn off for that reason? That they're being inundated by, so much political messaging? I know that's hard for you to calculate, but
it's very hard to calculate. There's an old expression, the management tool of the beatings will stop when the morale improves. The political equivalent of that is, if you want to stop getting text messages, vote. Because when you have a really well-run ground game, they not only track who you are and what your tastes in beer or alcohol are, they also track, have you voted? And so in 2008, I knew someone whose mother finally stopped, who was getting like 10 messages a day from the Obama people. And then as soon as she went and voted, she immediately stopped getting the spam. And the reason for that is the identity of the people who voted is public. And so when they track that Jill Smith voted in this precinct, they say, okay, we no longer need to talk to Jill. So
right, but they don't know how she voted, just that she voted.
No, that's right. It is public information that so-and-so voted, which allows people to challenge, hey, no, that voter is not legal for whatever reason.
So one of Judy's questions was, should we answer polls? I mean, does that invite more, spam or more, text messages?
And how do we know whose polls we should answer and what's a, pardon me, bullshit poll?
The totally BS polls are done in a system that they'll never call you by phone. They might text you. There are two kinds of polls. Sometimes politicians say, we're taking a poll. And what they're really doing is asking you to fill out a questionnaire that they will use to sell to you in the future. Obviously, as someone who is a consumer of polling, the more people respond to polls, the more accurate the polls will be. So please continue to answer your polls, but I do appreciate how annoying it can be.
Maybe we can go on to North Carolina, Julia, if you'll pull up that. There's a very weird governor's race going on between Attorney General Josh Stein, the Democrat, and Mark Robinson, who is the lieutenant governor, actually. Mark Robinson has said some pretty controversial things, and it doesn't look like he is going to win the gubernatorial race. But again, does this have and North Carolina in your electoral configuration is quite important to Kamala Harris. Could this election with a Democrat, out ahead on the governor's race, could that have an effect on the presidential race? But first, let's listen to the statement that Mark Robinson made recently on abortion.
Let's say I was the governor, I had a willing legislature. We could pass a bill saying you can't have an abortion in North Carolina for any reason.
For me, there is no compromise on abortion. It makes no difference to me why or how that child ended up in that womb.
Abortion in this country is not about protecting the lives of mothers. It's about killing a child because you aren't responsible enough to keep your skirt down. It's not your body anymore.
This is the Black Nazi, right?
Yeah.
Yes, right. Yeah, who thinks slavery should come back, and he'd like to own some slaves. So CNN came out with a lot of old statements that were found on social media that can be traced to Mark Robinson. And Robinson had, just to give him his due, he had a response to this. And Julia, if you can play that second one, his response to the CNN report about the various statements he made about racism and slavery.
What this amounts to is, to quote Clarence Thomas, this is a high-tech lynching on a candidate who has been targeted from day one by folks who disagree with me politically and want to see me destroyed. And so we are glad to take these first steps to fight back against what we consider to be one of the greatest examples of political interference in this state's history and quite possibly this nation's history.
So this is a weird race, Arnon. But I think for our audience, we're interested to know how that could potentially affect the presidential race. I know North Carolinians are pretty good at splitting their ticket. They've done that a lot in the past.
Well, that is the $64,000 question. I mean, but so I was chatting with one of the leaders of the Republican campaign committee for Congress people, and we were talking about congressional races in North Carolina, and we said, well, what's going to be the impact of Mark Robinson's race? And he said, oh, wait a minute. Are you telling me there's a gubernatorial campaign in my state?
Oh.
And he laughed. I think that is the attitude that is, Trump has been refusing to answer any question about Mark Robinson. And similarly, I think the congressional people are running away from him. At the same time, so the reality is, Mark Robinson is, as they say in the industry, a suboptimal candidate. He's got a lot of baggage. And you've only touched the tip of the iceberg, because in addition to the which various porn sites he frequently...
Oh yeah, I forgot about the porn sites.
Well, that was exactly.
Right.
But there's also some stuff about he ran a daycare center got state money for children who never enrolled or something. I don't exactly know, but it was some stuff that was a little bit of grift, more than the usual. And so the question is, are people able to differentiate between Mark Robinson or their vote in the gubernatorial race and the vote for presidency? My own sense is that it is easier, a poll, and I've been looking for proof of this. I haven't seen proof, but I believe it's probably true, that a poll overestimates the amount of ticket splitting. We just got our mail-in ballots for New York. And even though it's no longer that lever we use in New York, it's a grid. And you see a column of Republican candidates and a column of Democratic candidates. And so if you're voting Democratic or you're voting Republican, you're just going down a list. And so I think that is different from a person on the phone saying, and in this race, how are you going to vote? And in that race, how are you going to vote? let's just put it this way. I think the thing I would say about the Harris people is that Biden or the Democrats have been investing in North Carolina for 4 years. From the end of the 2020 campaign, I think the Biden White House decided, Georgia, we've gotten everything we can get out of it. The state where we haven't been able to squeeze as many more registrants as we should is North Carolina. And so they've spent a lot of money trying to invest and make it happen. And the cynic in me, and I'm sorry if the Democrats last won North Carolina when Barack Obama ran in 2008. I'm not even sure he won in 2012.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah.
And they haven't been able to win since. This year, they have an
But
enormous
Biden only
investment.
lost by 1 point.
Yeah,
The last time.
Biden only lost by 1. They've
Yeah.
had a huge investment in the in get out the vote and campaigning and registration in North Carolina. They are running, on the ticket is someone who is basically about as unfortunate a candidate as the Republicans can offer. And to make matters, and finally, there's been a hurricane. Yeah, there's a hurricane in the part of the state where Republicans are the most dominant. So if the Democrats actually don't win in North Carolina, which is, looking at the polls, certainly within the realm of possibility, they should pick up their tent and move. They could never win it, but we'll find out.
So what
My
you
bet
think
is
the
that Harris will do better in North Carolina than she does in Georgia. But again, that's a bet, that not to say she'll win. I'm just saying she'll do better than she does in Georgia.
So let's talk about Georgia. I mean, that is obviously the site of, many electoral challenges. In 2020, we have Brad Raffensperger continually having to come on television, the Secretary of State, and say, the vote is fine. There's no problem with fraud, but we hear so much disinformation. Is that a factor here in Georgia? And Biden did win that, and that really was what put him over the top in 2020. So how does Georgia look for you now?
Georgia again shows a slight edge to Trump. Georgia was a really close state, and Biden did win it in 2020. On the other hand, the incumbent governor, Brian Kemp, got won by 5 points over Stacey Abrams, who is, by the way, the woman who is the reason Georgia became close for the Democrats, because she did such a great job of registering African-American voters. But she lost by 5 points. So, and Kemp is, if nothing, the poster child of a non-MAGA Republican. He got into a fight with Trump. Trump wanted him not to run. Trump tried to get him to lose the primary. He won the primary. And now Trump is making nice to him because Kemp has such a strong organization. And so they are working together. I'd say that in many respects, one of the things I look at is how strong is the non-MAGA Republicans for Trump? And I suspect Georgia is a state where he's good there, but we'll find out. I'm not gonna. I'm not making a prediction. I'm only saying, to me, North Carolina is a better opportunity. But let me tell you, I think one of the things we've noticed is, there are still Republicans who believe that for whatever reason, Joe Biden was not legitimately elected president. And I mean, we heard what J.D. Vance said when he said, no, Donald Trump did not lose the 2020 election. The reason he says that is because there's a large chunk of Republicans who don't think Biden was legitimately elected. And these are not the people necessarily only people who think that the voting machines shifted from one candidate to the other. These are also people who think, oh, well, the Democratic states made changes in allowing mail-in vote and stuff, which were completely inappropriate because of COVID. And so that wasn't legit. I will say that what the Republicans need to do is figure out, how do you motivate voters who think voting is not legit and they're going to be stolen? That's not exactly a motivator to go out and vote, because if it's a motivator that says, even if you vote, it's not going to count. While at the same time not offending the group of Republicans who think, wait a second, we lost, sadly, but fair and square.
Well, it turns out that more Republicans are taking advantage of early voting at this point, than they did the last cycle. So, maybe some of that message is.
Oh, I think some of it is coming through.
Getting through, yeah.
Without question. And we've seen that in some of the early voting. We're not going to find out until election day or election night whether or not they are actually getting more voters to come out for them, or they're just cannibalizing the vote that they would have gotten
anyway on election day. Yeah. So, the blue wall that Kamala Harris has to hold on to, Wisconsin, is that really such a toss-up as it looks? I mean, Julia, can you pull up Tammy Baldwin and Eric Hovde, the Wisconsin Senate candidate? So that this race is also turning out to be very close between incumbent Tammy Baldwin and her challenger, Eric Hovde. I think it's how you say it. I don't know how to say it. Sorry.
I don't think anyone does.
Okay. But he's, it's shaping up to be kind of a close race too. Again, is that going to, drag the Democrats down if, Tammy Baldwin goes down?
I think that one of the things we've seen is in all, getting back to the notion of ticket splitting, in all these sort of Senate campaigns, the Senate race is beginning to converge onto the presidential race. And
Right.
people who were saying they were voting for Trump were often not saying they were voting for the Republican Senate candidate. All of a sudden, I think the Republicans who are voting for Trump discover that Eric Hovde has an R by his name. And the same thing is true in Pennsylvania and in Michigan. The Baldwin Eric Hovde is not, he was born in Wisconsin, but he made his fortune, I guess, in Southern California or something, and then moved back to run for Senate. He does appear on paper to be a very, very strong candidate. And I'm sure they're worried in the Baldwin camp. One of the things about politics that you need to be, and if I offend people, I don't mean to be offensive or make generalizations about either Republican voters or Democratic voters, but Tammy Baldwin is openly LGBT, and Hovde is maybe effectively making an issue out of that. It's not about the sexual orientation of Tammy Baldwin, but in the debate, he made a big thing out of the fact that Tammy Baldwin's partner is some very successful Wall Street executive, and she does not need to file disclosure forms for how she invests or the like because of the rules of the Senate. And they're trying to make an issue out of that, which is both around who is she really? In other words, is she beholden to anyone for the financial interests of her partner, and also possibly over the fact that rural Wisconsinites may have a problem or may be uncomfortable voting for someone who is openly LGBT.
But she's been elected a couple of times.
She has won election twice.
Yeah.
And last time was a fairly easy re-election. This one seems tougher.
Yeah. And that could, hinge control of the Senate. All of these races could. So let's talk about third-party candidates. Jill Stein, if you can pull up the Jill Stein stuff, Julia, that'd be great, is the Green Party candidate and has run twice before, not in 2020, I think there was another candidate, but in 2012 and 2016. And she's given agita to the Democrats, especially, in 3 cycles so far. Let's listen to her rationale for why she's running and what will inevitably be a losing battle. So you can play Jill Stein.
People are tired of being thrown under the bus by wealthy elites and their bought politicians. Tired of living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to pay the rent, locked in student debt and medical debt, child poverty doubling, rising diseases of despair, growing hopelessness. The political system is broken. The two Wall Street parties are bought and paid for. Over 60% of us now say the bipartisan establishment's failed us, and we need a party that serves the people. I'm Jill Stein, and I'm running for president to offer that choice for the people outside of the failed two-party system. We'll put solutions to the crises we face, crushing inequality, endless war, and climate collapse. And we'll put these front and center in this election and on the ballot across the country.
So she's expressing a lot of things that people aren't concerned about, the economy, the, wars, climate change. She didn't really talk about abortion too much, but
It'll be a Democratic issue.
right. But, she will tend to take from Democrats versus Republicans because, she is considered a liberal. What will her effect be? She's on the ballot in at least five of these swing states, Wisconsin, where is she? Wisconsin, well, I don't have it in front of me.
The key one she's in
Pennsylvania.
is Michigan.
Uh-huh.
She's in Michigan, and she's making a big issue out of the Biden administration's support for Israel and the war in the Middle East, the wars in the Middle East.
Mhm.
And Michigan has a sizable Arab American population or Muslim population that is traditionally Democratic. And that may make a difference between winning and losing that state. And she is running a campaign that sort of is consistent with what some in the Arab American or Muslim community believe, which is we're better off not voting for punishing the Democrats for their support of Israel than we are, risking a Donald Trump presidency.
So are they going to stay home, or are they going to actually vote for Donald Trump?
They could easily go out and vote for Jill Stein. They could be, some may vote for Trump and some will stay home.
Mm-hmm.
But they're campaigning very hard for Jill Stein. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see her get 1% or 2%. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the difference between the winner and the loser. No,
I find it
I think Bobby
amazing.
Kennedy's still on the ballot in Michigan, and he'll probably draw more from Trump right now.
Right. Judy?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I find there's a question in chat that I'll read, but then I'll give my own comment too. Diane asks, how important do you think Stein will be? Will she be a spoiler of some fear? And, 1% doesn't sound like anything, but if you don't want Trump to win, or if you don't want Harris to win, frankly, you're a fool to vote for her, I think. So do you think she can be a spoiler? Do you want to comment on that?
Without question, when you see a 1-point race and you have a third-party candidate who could easily, and for whom there is a rationale to vote. If you oppose the Harris or the Biden-Harris policy in the Middle East, even if you think that the Trump policy may be worse, punishing that party is not necessarily an own goal. It can be a very effective long-range tool for getting a party to address your group's needs.
So so talk a little bit about the Middle East and and what effect the conflict there may have on the presidential race, not only in Michigan, although I understand it's important in Michigan, but overall.
I think it can have a major impact on the economy. I mean, on the election. And that's because, not necessarily because that people oppose the Biden administration policies or support the Biden administration policies or whatnot, but because, this war has been going on for now over a year. And it's a very scary thing where one side, we believe, may have nuclear weapons, and where the photo, we all saw the photos on October 7th of the massacre of 1,200 Israelis that took place. But and that was what we saw on October 7th, 2023. But what we've been seeing since then are horrible photos of the impact of bombings or other battles between the Israelis and Hamas in Gaza. And so it gives people the impression that things are just out of control. And so when things are out of control, I want to kick the bums out that are there today. And who's the bum? And I want to go for someone who's going to clamp down and end this chaos. And who is responsible for the chaos, or who's been in the White House? Kamala Harris. And who seems to be one of these tough guys who's going to address this problem? I mean, that's Trump's persona. In fact, in a
he
funny
promises
kind of way,
all these things, and none of them can be done. I mean, he says he's going to end the Ukraine-Russia war on day one.
I'm not here to tell you.
He can say anything and act like a big, strong man.
And just for the record, I'm not here to tell you or anyone here who to vote for. I am here to tell you what we think America is voting for. And unfortunately, the stuff that they're talking about how he wants to be an authoritarian or the other stuff is consistent with, if you have a real problem, you want an authoritarian. There's a reason for them.
So maybe we'll take one. I'll have one last question. We'll talk about a little bit, how much time you think it'll take to actually decide this election. So I'm going to ask you, Arnon, and then we can go to questions. Have you scheduled a vacation yet?
Sleep late the next day.
So they interviewed me on Politico, and they asked me, when are we going to know the election? And I thought, okay, what can I say that is not going to embarrass me or cause problems? Because I don't know. I do know, and so what I said was, the betting line is when we knew last time, which is when Pennsylvania reported, and we know that Pennsylvania has not changed the way they report. And so I wouldn't be surprised to hear from Pennsylvania not until Saturday.
Wow.
That's when we heard last time. That's when we made the call, and that's when Biden went over 270. I wouldn't be surprised if we see the same pattern this time around, particularly because almost every route to the White House goes through Philadelphia.
And there are going to be a lot of challenges too, right? I mean, Georgia tried to, institute this hand count, which was shut down by a judge. But, I think there are going to be a lot of challenges, and as there were in Arizona.
There will likely be challenges. I mean, we will still be reporting the vote as reported by the states, and we'll be telling you what we know about that vote. But we may be in for a long period. Technically, I'm supposed to go on vacation that Saturday night.
Well, good luck with that.
I may have to delay.
Right.
Yeah. So Judy, do you have questions or?
Yes. Rick asks, what do private pollsters know that public pollsters do not know?
Meaning from the campaigns, for instance?
Well, about who's ahead, what's really going on, what the main issues are, things like that.
You mean internal polls?
The internal polls are better than what you're reading. And what I'm reading the public polling. Both campaigns are probably devoting 10% of their budgets to research of some kind or other. Qualitative research, meaning focus groups, or quantitative research, mainly meaning polling. 10% of the Kamala Harris campaign budget is $100 million. And for Trump, it's probably 70 million or 50 million, I don't know what. But their polls are much better than what you guys get to see, that we get to see. And they sometimes will release a poll when they only release a poll when it's consistent with what they want to say. Okay, and rarely do they release a poll that's a complete fiction. But when they release the poll, there's probably something else more going on there than just what the numbers say. And so, but when you see a candidate going to a state and you don't quite understand why they're doing that, that's an indication of what their polling shows. So there's a race in Nebraska, which I think the Republicans in the end will win, but it's the independent candidates running really strongly. And there were a couple of nonsense polls that came out that no one in the media really trusted, saying that the incumbent Deb Fischer was in some trouble. But then we saw that the Republican Senate Campaign Committee started investing several $1 million in Nebraska media advertising. So we knew what their polls were showing.
They vote for their money. Diane asks a question. Arnon, you said you've been particularly attentive to the male vote, especially among African Americans. That Trump has been, particularly attentive to the male vote among African Americans, Hispanics, etc. Why is he being systematically disinclined to look at the women's vote, given how great the gender gap is these days and how mobilized we are by the Dobbs decision? I would just add to that, has he given up on the women's vote?
He has not given up on the women's vote, and I think he's made attempts to try to appeal to women. I think some of them have been a little ham-handed. But you know, he's subtly tried to, you know, Melania went out and said that she supports a woman's right to choice, or I don't know how she expressed it. They made a very big thing to try to prevent the Republican convention from talking a lot about abortion. They want to sort of soft pedal it as much as possible. We'll find out if they've been successful, but I think in general, a majority of women seem to be highly motivated to vote for Kamala Harris. There's another thing going on in the male vote that, again, when you do political analysis, you can't, in order to be correct about political analysis, you sometimes need to be politically incorrect. And I think there is, and so if I offend anybody, I'm sorry. I think there is a subtle message of, is Kamala Harris tough enough to sit behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office? That is clearly a way of getting at any sort of nascent or subconscious attitudes about whether or not a woman can do the job. And
well, I think that that's probably, you know, more than just a little thing with a lot of people in, you know, in the electorate, is that, you know, we've never had a woman president. And, you know, I think that there are more votes out there of people who will not vote for a woman, but they won't tell you that they're not going to vote for her because she's a woman. So they'll pick on these other things that they think, you know, represent her points of view.
Yeah, I agree with you.
What about racism? You know, is that a secret, you know, that people are keeping, and then, you know, they just can't see voting, you know, for someone who clearly is not white?
We will find out, and we're asking a question on that on our election day poll. It very possibly could be. I think there are clearly signs that the Republicans are trying to get at some of that nascent, you know, at that dog whistle of, is a Black or an Indian woman really up to this job?
Right. Judy, are there other questions?
Yeah, Judy seems to have been kicked off and having computer problems.
Okay.
So if you have questions, you can raise your hand, and Inara, you can call on people.
Okay, I can't see everybody all at once. If you see anybody,
Yeah, I
let
don't
me
see
know.
any hands raised. Let me go to my other screen. No, I don't see any
Can you
hands
hear
raised.
me? Karen,
Yes,
can you-
Rita,
Yes.
are you there?
Go ahead,
Okay,
Rita.
good. Yeah,
Unmute
go
and
ahead,
go
Rita.
ahead.
I have to say,
And then Diane has a question also. She can go after you. Go ahead, Rita.
Okay.
okay, I can say hello to both of you. It's nice to see you again. I have a couple of questions. One is, I'm hearing that more young people are being organized to vote. I bring this up in class quite often, and I'm pinning a lot of hopes on the fact that the young people's vote may make a difference. I don't know if it's big enough to do that.
The first-time voter could be really important in this election. And young people tend to be, if you think adults, they're all adults. But if you think older people are hard to poll, younger people are even harder. They're much more, likely to be out in the evening or whatever, not answering their phones or whatnot. There is some evidence, young people, we think, at least in 2022, were highly motivated on social issues, and were therefore tended to be more likely to vote Democratic. On the other hand, there are a lot of young people who are concerned about who's going to get us into a war, and my buddies are going to get drafted, or stuff like that, and that may put them into the Republican camp, since the Republicans are the ones who more likely talk about getting rid of endless wars and, blame Biden for the Ukraine invasion, blame Biden for October 7th in Israel. And so that's one of the mysteries. It may wind up putting Kamala over the top. It may wind up giving Trump a very, very significant victory.
Ah,
All right, Diane, you have a question. You can unmute and maybe use the video so we can see you.
Hi, thank you. I actually had asked the question before about gender, and my question actually had been on, it seemed as though I was trying to, as you went through early, you said Mr. Milshin, were looking specifically at how men were voting, and African-American men. I'm wondering why you seem systematically inclined to look at the male vote and not the women's vote. And I'm wondering why you've made that decision, given what we've heard about, the great gender gap now, and the mobilization around Dobbs. I mean, you did sort of explain some portion of that as you described how it's hard to make sense of exactly how to make sense of abortion, but even still, given what we now, lots of polls have indicated that there's now a meaningful party division by gender. And I'm wondering why then you are so inclined to look at the male vote rather than the women's.
Okay, so inartful speaking on my part. And what I mean by the numbers to look at is more about, but anyone who's looking at election returns, you're looking for patterns. You're looking for patterns that make sense and for patterns that are sort of odd or surprising. And so, you're looking at where the dog is biting. You're not looking at where the dog bites the man, but where the man bites the dog, or the person bites the dog, if you will. And what has been the four weird things that are going on is why are minority groups, particularly Hispanics, who are, let's face it, Donald Trump has been running it's not a dog whistle on the belief that we should reduce the immigration from the southern border, which is Mexican or Latin American or Latino immigration. And so when you see his number going up among that group, that's something that's worth looking at. What's going on there? And similarly, and when you look at it, you realize what seems to be going on there is more, at least in the African-American community amongst minorities, is something going on amongst African-American men who are not voting in the same way as African-American women are voting. The numbers you see for African-American women are much more consistent with what you'd expect to see. And so the numbers you want to look at and say, okay, what's going on here? This is weird. That would be African-American men, Latino men. And similarly on the other side, one of the numbers, you expect Republicans are going to vote for Donald Trump. They're Republicans. But when you see actually there's a group here amongst Republicans that aren't voting for Donald Trump, you say, okay, what's going on here? Why is that? And it turns out actually there's a sliver of Republicans who are really uncomfortable with Trump. And we saw that in 2020. We even saw that in 2016. And one of the big questions for the week from Tuesday is going to be, do those people go home to Trump? Do they stay home and not vote for anybody? Or do they decide to defect and vote for Kamala Harris? And that will be in many respects a much more interesting story than what MAGA Republicans are doing, because they're going to vote for Trump. Now, that doesn't mean their vote counts for more. It just means that brain time of my team is more focused on what's going on here. This is hard to explain. How do you explain it?
Well, except
Does
that
that
he
make
is,
sense?
yes, except that he is very explicitly, I mean, I don't know if there's can be any more explicit demonstration of this than the very explicit way in which he talked about Arnold Palmer, right? I mean, he's absolutely fueling a very crude base, really fueling a kind of and a very ugly view of men and a very, sorry, so forgive me, but the point is, so
No, I
in
get
those
it.
terms, so I do understand okay, well.
Okay, we
Yeah,
have time
Will
for
any of us
one more.
ever be able to go into a bar and order an Arnold Palmer again?
I
right,
don't
we
know.
have-
Quick question. The 43 states that are never talked about, that are preordained to be Republican or Democrat, do you see any chance that any of these 43 states, there will be an upset and they won't go according to plan?
I saw a chance a couple of weeks ago. I don't see it now. On the other hand,
Which
I think
state?
one of the things we're going to look at early in the night is what is Virginia tends to report very quickly. And one of the things we're going to be looking at is what's the margin in Virginia? Is it as wide for the Democrats as we anticipate, or is it actually a closer margin? Similarly, actually states that will absolutely not go Democratic, but the two earliest states reporting are Indiana and Kentucky. They will definitely be voting for Trump, but it'll be interesting to see what his margin is. Is it as big as we anticipate, or are there signs of any kind of defection?
What?
But
Well,
I
the
think,
answer is no. You don't see any upsets, other
I
possibly
don't see any.
Virginia.
I mean, okay. I noticed today that Donald Trump is doing an event in Texas tomorrow.
So is Kamala Harris. She's trying to help Colin Allred.
Well, that's right. Kamala Harris is doing an event in Houston where Beyonce is going to be singing, and they're going to be talking about the abortion laws in Texas. So it's probably a worthwhile expenditure of jet fuel to get to Houston for a nice local backdrop to what is a national event saying, these abortion laws are bad. And you should vote against them and vote for me for that on a national basis. And while she's there, she's going to have Beyonce at her rally, which will also make it national. So that's explainable without anyone thinking she thinks she has any chance of winning Texas. On the other hand, when you see Trump going to Austin to help Ted, is he just going to be there for Ted Cruz? It either means his polls say he's absolutely guaranteed election and he's just doing a victory dance, or
But Austin is like the least receptive.
Yeah, but
place in Texas for him.
But a hit in Texas gets you a lot of coverage in Texas.
Okay, well,
but don't you think
we have to close up? Thank you. Inara, do you have any final words?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about the Texas Senate race. So do you think Colin Allred has any chance of beating Ted Cruz? I mean, he's the former congressman, linebacker, very attractive African-American guy. And he's running, within, 2 to 4 points of Cruz. Is that the reason that Harris might be there? Because she thinks there's a shot? And that would lead us, if we had more time, to the control of the Senate, because that would, certainly make a difference there.
Ted Cruz is always in danger in his reelection. But Ted Cruz is a really smart guy, and he's been acting like he can lose for a year and a half. So he's been very, very good at spending a lot of time campaigning. But on the other hand, he's not, there's always a possibility there. If anyone can do it, Colin Allred is about as good a candidate as possible. I thought he did a fairly effective debate against Cruz. I would put my money on Cruz, but I think Cruz will, as he got 6 years ago, get another scare of his life, but probably will still win.
Well, it's too bad that Judy isn't here at the end, but on behalf of CLNL, I want to thank Arnon and Inara. Thank you so much. And can we give them a